Hello everyone, it is Joe here from OmniPoke, the channel that brings you guys everything Pokemon, and today we are looking at another Ultra Prism deck. This time it's going to be Empoleon, the card that we rated a little bit low in the set review, and we did get some backlash from that, and we've taken it on board, and we are going to start building around this card. There's going to be a couple of lists of Empoleon. Today is going to be a more single prize focus list, and there's also going to be a Zoroark GX focus build as well, so sit back and enjoy the video. First of all, the basic concept of Empoleon. The whole selling point of this card is that it's a single prize focused deck. 160 HP is pretty bulky for a single prize, and his damage output is pretty strong as well. 20 damage for each benched Pokemon, both yours and your opponent's, is a decent baseline. You also have Choice Band on top, so you can definitely hit some higher numbers. We know that plenty of decks are trying to go for the Tapu, Lele, Brigette plays because many evolution decks in the format are very strong right now. People are hoping to get multiple Zoroark GX in play, to get trading a bunch, and that's just simply not going to change in the format. So I think because everyone requires large bench sizes, Empoleon almost has a disruption element to him, because either the opponent doesn't get a full bench out and has a sort of half-baked strategy, they can't draw as many cards as they'd like, and they're pretty much making their own deck weaker because they're not thinning as much as possible. Or the alternative is that they do those things, and then Empoleon gets big damage counters on the board and is oftentimes getting one-hit KOs. So he almost adds a bit of disruption element to him as well, just because the opponent has to be aware of their own bench and how they utilize it. So yeah, Empoleon, decent attack. He does have a bit of extra burst. You can see that his main attack is for water and colorless. Not quite perfect, but we do have Aqua Patch at least, and we also have counter energy that we're utilizing in the deck as well. So hopefully we can make some comebacks and swing the board with these attachments and get bursts from nowhere. Just like how very old Empoleon lists play things like Scramble Energy and stuff like that. Empoleon's going to try and use the same thing here. And another big plus side of this Empoleon deck, we are of course a stage 2, but we do have the help of things like Brooklet Hill throughout the game to make sure that we can have a decent amount of Piplups on the board so that we can keep our damage high with our own Empoleon, but also so that we can keep evolving into Empoleons and evolving up into Prinplups. And at the same time, we can establish Octillery very early on in the game, and we've seen how important that can be for the likes of the Buzzwole, Lycanroc variant, and also things like Volcanion even. I'm a big fan of Octillery in that list, so Empoleon going to take full advantage of Brooklet Hill, a very, very nice stadium card. So, let's jump into the list. First of all, we are going to go with the Pokemon, 17 in total. We're going to have a thick 4-2-4 line of the Empoleon. There aren't too many influential attacks on the Piplup or Prinplup. The Prinplup can do a little 20 poke, which can help out at times for setting the Empoleon in range. That can be worthwhile for noting, but oftentimes you don't really want to sack a Prinplup just to do a small amount of damage. Instead, it's much better to evolve up fully into your Empoleon to start using his total command attack. As I just mentioned earlier, Water Colorless does 20 times the number of benched Pokemon. Very decent. You're obviously going to have the baseline of 100 with your own bench, you would imagine, and then whatever your opponent has on their bench is going to be cream on top. Choice Band as well can push this easily into one-hit KOs, things like Tapu Leles and whatnot. They will be in range, and at the very least you're doing minimum 2-hit KOs, so pretty good on a non-GX, non-EX Pokemon. Whirlpool is his other attack for water colorless, which just has 90 and discards energy from the opponent's active. There may be niche spots where this is helpful, especially when you play counter energy as well. You could just slap an extra one on there, and Whirlpool is then accessible. If you're going to be 2-hit KOing anyway, getting the extra discards may help out in random situations. So then the other cards in the Pokemon slots are going to be the Octillery line, helping you cycle throughout the game and make sure that you can keep drawing into rare candies and stage 2 pieces. Going to be important for certain. And we also have the Alolan Vulpix. Both Piplup and Remoraid have a 1 retreat cost, so does Tapu Lele, so it should be fairly easy to get into your Alolan Vulpix with the help of Brigette's and Brooklet Hills. We play both in the list, so it should be easy to get Beaconing. Beacon getting you into Octillery and some stage 2 pieces is going to be very, very good. And seeing as though it's Brooklet Hill searchable feels like a no-brainer to me. And then finally, just 2 Tapu Lele GX. Still going to be nice, but oftentimes we want bench spaces for the Octilleries and stuff like that, so we only need a couple of copies in here, in my opinion. We could potentially go up one more just because having bench Pokemon is important for the deck. I was similarly thinking of upping the Vulpix count to 2 as well, just because having more basics in the deck is going to be helpful for your total command output. So that's something to keep an eye on, and maybe something I discuss later on in the tech section of the list. Onto the items, we are going to play one Field Blower. Trying to remove tools is going to be nice, seeing as though we are Octillery focused to an extent, and also Parallel City is going to be a big issue for this deck. Limiting your bench is going to be a big problem, but also your opponent limiting their own bench is a problem, especially because it also minuses 20 from water attacks when it's facing that way. So Field Blowing those off in combination with 3 Brooklet Hills should be plenty to keep bouncing Parallel and countering the stadiums as often as possible. 1 Rescue Stretcher in addition to 1 Super Rod gives us plenty of Pokemon recovery, important for keeping a full bench of course, but also making sure that we can have multiple stage 2s to attack with throughout the game. 4 Ultra Ball, 4 Rare Candy, trying to max out on these cards. Pretty natural for a stage 2 deck, really. Ultra Ball also really nice for activating Aqua Patch and lowering the hand size for the Octillery. Rare Candy, of course, essential for the Empoleon. 3 Choice Band to increase our damage output that little bit more. So the opponent needs 2 bench Pokemon for you to be able to one-hit KO Tapu Leles, so that's pretty good. Oh, sorry, they need to have 3 bench Pokemon. And Choice Band on top, so yeah, pretty good. Pretty much every deck can't really rely on having less than 3 bench, I would say, unless it's super late game situations. So Choice Band is oftentimes going to help you get you there for KOing 2 prizes here and there around the board. 3 Aqua Patches going to be helpful, as I said, to keep attaching onto your Empoleons and making sure you can always respond with a new attacker. And 3 copies of Brooklet Hill, going to be nice for getting those early Pokemon out, ever so important, and also always having a recovery option for you when you lose Pokemon in the active. You not only lose the Pokemon itself, but you lose potentially a bench Pokemon because you have to promote a new one, so maintaining more damage throughout the game via Brooklet Hill is also beneficial. Onto the supporters, very simple once again, just 1 Brigette because we also have the Brooklet Hill to fall back on. I feel like it's not worth playing 2 copies. This again may be a reason why you want to play a 3rd Tapu Lele or a 2nd Alolan Vulpix. These can also mitigate the fact that we only play 1 Brigette. Then 4 copies of Guzna, Sycamore, and N. Once again, we're choosing to not play Cynthia. Trust me, Cynthia will be a played card in the format, but we're still opting for Sycamore in this list, mainly because we want to activate Aqua Patch whenever possible. You can argue that Cynthia may be better because you want to shuffle in Rare Candy pieces and Empoleon pieces, but I think Shuffle Draw isn't so strong when you're playing Octillery anyway. Oftentimes you'll be stuck with a hand that you can't play at all when you have Octillery, so it's better to dump and draw via Sycamore, so then you can get more insta-play cards for your Octillery to get more value. So I think Cynthia could be reasonable in here. You could try flipping up the counts with the Sycamore, maybe go for a 2-2 split, something like that. But overall, I think having an Aqua Patch activator is going to be important for you, so that's why we've gone down this route. But definitely want to experiment. I know so far we've been kind of boring in our choice, really, of supporters in our most recent lists, oftentimes opting for Sycamore over Cynthia. You have to remember that Sycamore's still an insane card, and one of the most insane cards we've ever seen. So even though Cynthia is a very good card, it's not getting a look in many lists, but it will start sneaking in, and we're going to start seeing changes, I'm sure, at some point. It just feels like when you have Octillery in the back anyway, you don't want your hand to be clogged with any more supporters. Doesn't make sense to fit in Cynthia's on top of Sycamores and N's right now. And I think N is going to be a staple for its entirety because it's so important that making comebacks a reality. And Sycamore going to be useful as well just because of the Aqua Patch synergy. So right now, no love for Cynthia, but you guys can test it out for yourselves. And finally, for the energy, we are going to play 2 copies of Counter Energy. You can start flipping and flopping between waters and counters. I think at the moment 2 is fine. There are some interesting options we can try and incorporate into the list if we want to go a heavier Counter Energy route. Things like Sudowoodo, which I'll mention later, could be really nice for the list. And there are a few other Counter Energy cards that you can start considering, but for now, just going to play the 2 copies to help supplement you throughout the game. We have to remember, of course, that E-Hammer pre-Ultra Prism is at like a really high, like it's in a lot of different decks right now. It's really heavily played, so I think 2 is enough to get away with it and get value from it, but also not so many that we're going to get punished for it throughout the game. And still having 8 Water Energy gives us plenty to manually attach throughout the game. We can pay retreat into Alolan Vulpix and have that ready to be Aqua Patch later on. And we can just have manual attachments and Aqua Patch available for multiple turns. So I think the split is currently, again, on the safe side. You can go more heavily counter energy focused. I think 3-7 is, again, very similar to 2-8. And if you're going to try and fit in the Sudowoodo, which is something I may consider, especially if Zoroark remains as popular as possible, or as it is right now, you can go down that route. So yeah, counter energy, definitely a good card in the deck, but we sort of need to get the counts perfect for now. So here is the overall view of the list. Pause here if you wish. You can see it all in its glory. I think the main flexible counts, potentially one of the Brooklet Hills is flexible. Potentially the counter energy, water energy count is a bit flexible. Field Blower only in here currently just because of extra defense against things like Garbodor and Parallel. That could potentially be cut for like a Alolan Vulpix or a Tapu Lele. Those are the sort of things that I'm wanting right now, but really I think this is pretty close to maybe optimal, I think, for an Octillery List of Empoleon at the very least. But there are still some tech Pokemon that we can go over, and let's start having a look at those. So if you are going to go for the second copy of Alolan Vulpix, maybe just shoving in one Alolan Ninetales GX is also going to be nice. The deck currently doesn't have a GX attack available, so having Ice Path GX against decks that do like to 2-hit KO is going to be nice. Ice Path as well, doing 50 damage is actually really important, because there'll be a point where the opponent can't play around your damage output from Empoleon because you've put 50 snipes all over the board. So Alolan Ninetales GX could definitely be a nice inclusion, even as just like a 1 copy, similar to how we saw it in some Decidueye Ninetales lists, where it's just a 2-1 line of Alolan Vulpix and the 1 Ninetales GX. I think that could really work out well. Plus Blizzard Edge is some stable damage, which the deck is sort of lacking right now, so maybe a 2-1 line of the Ninetales is going to be nice. Maybe you could split the Octillery count to a 2-1 as well and see how that goes for you. Mr. Mime could be played in the deck. I know that Piplup does have 70 hit points, so it may be a little bit less desirable. That's why we've not gone down that route just yet. But don't forget that Piplup does have lightning weakness, so Tapu Koko can be doing some pesky flying flips, and it actually is more impactful on your Piplups themselves, so, or at least the one that's in the active. So Mr. Mime might be important if you're worried about that, and things like Buzzwole. The Sudowoodo, as I said, if you do go more heavily down a counter energy route, you may need to find space for Sudowoodo. He's going to be really nice against the Zoroark variants. He's also pretty cool at just keeping you in the game as like a basic Pokemon that can swing pretty nicely. 160 hit points is a lot to get over in one hit, so if they're hitting 160 on you, then you can choice band up and hit things like 190. That's going to get you over Buzzwoles, that's getting you over things like Tapu Bulu, and the Metal decks as well. If they're going to start becoming more important, Watch and Learn Sudowoodo's value just increases a bunch. And plus, Sudowoodo is also Brooklet Hill searchable, which you're already playing 3 copies of. So making one space for Sudowoodo and going heavily or more heavily down the counter energy route could be a great way for this deck to survive. And I think that's something I want to explore further. That would be, of all these techs, I think the Ninetales and the Sudowoodo are definitely standout picks for trying to make spaces for. Right now I've just gone for a very basic list, very straightforward, but you can tinker around with counts and try and fit these cards in and see how they go for you. The one basic Hooper as well is an interesting one, in a similar vein to Ice Blade, setting up numbers. Hyperspace Punch, doing 20 to 2 of your opponent's Pokemon in any way that you like, is, again, pretty nice. Just these extra little pokes here and there can put the Empoleon into better range for you, so that could also be a consideration, just for math fixing in general. Then a couple of supporter options. We're not playing Skylar, even though we are a Stage 2 deck. It could be nice for pulling out things like Rare Candy, Ultra Ball, and even things like Aqua Patch to make sure we can keep attacking. And again, I mentioned Cynthia. It's something that we can try and split with our Sycamores. I wouldn't ever go down from 4N. I think it's still just the most important supporter in the game right now, alongside Guzma, pretty much. But I think Sycamore may be a flexi spot that you can start going in and out with Cynthia as you please. And the final fun option is Captivating Pokepuff. You can get those random turns where the opponent's holding onto bench Pokemon. You can slap them down, get themselves back in range for big one-hit KOs. I think it's not very reliable. You'd have to play at least 2 copies, in my opinion, for it to be a genuine consideration. And I think if I'm committing 2 spaces to anything, I would rather go down the Ninetales or the Sudowoodo route. So although it could be very fun to catch people out, get their Lele down in the opening hand, and ruin their turn one hand. I think oftentimes it's just going to be more of a meme card than going to be a staple in this list, but it could be a big swing in some different matchups for some surprise factor as well. So let's look at some matchups for this deck. I honestly think there aren't too many that are absolutely awful. Lycanroc can always pose issues to any sort of stage 2 deck because they can always target the most important Pokemon. Buzzwole doing early damage. I think the fact that you have 70 HP on Piplup is an absolute godsend. It means that Buzzwole can't take the prizes as easily on your lower HP Pokemon. And the damage output and HP of Empoleon's really good against most Zoroark builds, so I think it's relatively safe against some of the tier 1 stuff right now, outside of Lycanroc just being able to cheese out your early board setup. I think the biggest issues come from some of the lightning type decks, the Luxray of course giving weakness, and also stopping us using items is going to be really awkward because we are a stage 2 deck that is reliant on items. Even though we do have things like Brooklet Hill to get our basics down, it's going to be hard for us to slowly get into Empoleon. Plus, the Luxray build doesn't really need much bench outside of things like the Shining Celebi and like other Luxray. It doesn't need much very often to beat us at the very least. It can play other bench Pokemon for other matchups, but against Empoleon specifically, they don't need to commit in order to win. Turbo Raichu again feels pretty rough. 200 HP is an awkward number for Empoleon. Typically, they can keep us at 190 or less. And especially because they hit for weakness, they don't need to go all in and benching like their 5th Pachirisu and whatever. Or their 5th bench Pokemon, probably a Pachirisu. So they can sort of manage their own bench and get over you quite easily. Especially because we're a slower stage 2 deck. They have a few turns to use the Pachirisu to set up energy on the board. And finally, Metagross. I've been saying it a lot that your damage output isn't always perfect, and Metagross is a deck that can definitely cash in on that and just get into the heal loop. Metagross only hits 150, but if Empoleon is going to be a deck, they can start playing Delmise if they would like. Although it is a bench Pokemon for them, it is going to really help out against the Empoleon matchup. So yeah, I think Metagross should always be a pretty bad matchup for you just because they can get into the healing loop. You're both stage 2 decks, so you're about as fast as each other, and there's really no win condition for Empoleon there, in my opinion. So here are some closing thoughts on this list. The format is definitely crying out for a good single prize deck. There's things like even Xerneas Break, which is a slow single prize deck, has been in and around tier like 2 for a bit, tier 2, tier 3 at the very least. And that's just because there aren't any good single prize decks out there right now. It's only been like Greninja for the longest time. So having things like the Garchomp Lucario and the Empoleon added into the mix is going to be really nice for the format and gives a nice alternative to just big one-hit KO decks. So that's good to see. One of the biggest issues of the deck is always going to be the fact that your opponent can have a say in how much damage you're doing. Typically, they won't bench X amount of Pokemon that will get them into one-hit KO range unless it's at a point in the game where they can win by doing so. So the fact that the opponent can play around your output is going to be the biggest issue for Empoleon, and probably the Achilles heel of the deck, ultimately meaning that it probably won't be top tier, even though it has a nice draw engine and is non-EX focused. I think it's still going to have some issues. That being said, there's going to be another Empoleon list coming soon. The Zoroark build gives you an alternate attacker. It also is a great way to activate your Aqua Patches without having to use Sycamores, which again can come with its own benefits. So the Zoroark variant should be a fun one. I think Zoro Empoleon could be a good way of winning mirror matches against other Zoroark variants because you manage their bench size. So either they're not trading as much as you are, so you're the more consistent Zoroark list that also has a 160 HP Pokemon, or they do start trying to keep up with you with the amount of trades they have available to them, and you're going to be swinging very hard with the Empoleon overall. So that could be a more promising way to look at Empoleon for the future. For now, though, that's what we have for the straight Empoleon list. Hope you did enjoy this. Let us know what decks you want to see next from Ultra Prism. I hope you do enjoy the, or at least you can appreciate the slideshow videos until the set comes out on PTCGO. Let me know what you guys think about the list, and subscribe to the channel if you've not already. It has been Joe from OmniPoke, and I'll see you guys next time. Cheers.